I'm going to start by clarifying our understanding of decolonization and decoloniality, and then examine the implications of education and training of psychologists in Africa. And in particular, our conversation will look at how the principles of decoloniality influence the development of aims and outcomes of psychology professional development programs in an African context. This is an incomplete theoretical framework. It's still in progress, but this is one way of presenting our understanding. It could be of decoloniality as both a deconstructive and reconstructive process. We do, if I can say up front, acknowledge that there's a difference between colonialism and coloniality. And for those who were here for Professor Bulhan's presentation, he spoke about meta-coloniality to make that same distinction between the historical colonialism. So coloniality is about, decoloniality is about understanding the coloniality of power, knowledge, and mind within the colonial matrix of power. And that includes issues of race and class and gender and sexuality, disability, all the areas where hierarchies of power play themselves out. It's about recognizing the dominance of Euro-North American-centric worldviews and knowledge, noting oppression of marginalized voices, and recognizing our own social position in power relations, which we often talk about as critical reflexivity, which I know Shanaz is going to go into in more detail later. On the reconstructive side, the challenge of decoloniality is about addressing all the different hierarchies of power and how they get entangled, promoting a participatory and co-learning approach, valuing and engaging pluriversal ways of being and seeing, and developing as well as drawing on marginalized knowledges and silenced voices. Because we're talking about the professional development of psychologists, we're talking about education and curriculum, and what I'm just presenting here is a picture of how one can view curriculum, with the emphasis being on that there are different components of a curriculum. It's not just about what resources we use. It's not just about content or materials. It's a whole lot of components that make up our programs. And it's informed by the values and principles that inform our work, that emerge from our societal context and needs, and the way we respond to that by developing education aims and outcomes. It's how these values and principles are enacted through the teaching and learning environment, how we develop a curriculum and structure it, teaching and learning approaches and methods, and curriculum content and materials, which is often what people only focus on. The important thing is that all of these aspects work together to create a hidden curriculum. So if we don't look at how our values and principles play themselves out in the different aspects, we could inadvertently be teaching something other than what we think we're teaching, because it's those values and principles that come out in all these different components. This is just another way of looking at it, and what we're arguing is that those decolonial principles that I referred to earlier, those are the things we need to take into account in all components of the curriculum. We're going to focus just on one aspect and have a little bit of a conversation about that, which we haven't rehearsed, so I haven't a clue what Kapano is going to say, and he doesn't know what I will say. We're going to focus on the one aspect, the societal context and needs, and how we respond to that with educational aims and outcomes around the development of psychologists. There are 4 questions. There are more, but we've identified 4 questions one would ask when looking at this aspect of curriculum. What do we need to consider when analyzing our context? How do we set about developing a responsive curriculum that addresses the challenges raised by the decolonial and decolonizing lens? What would you expect to see in all aspects of the curriculum based on this? And how does our profession respond to these challenges? We're going to look at the last question and have a conversation around that. And we're not going to answer all these questions. I'm going to quickly go through some of the questions that we think this raises, because the challenge is that, not that we come in with answers, but that we need to be looking at these questions. I think we challenged, all of us who teach and are involved in professional development, to answer these questions. What are the societal and economic realities that we need to take into account? What are the priority needs that we should be sensitive to and addressing in our societies? More specifically, how does the colonial power matrix play itself out in our societies? How are our programs, our curricula, taking seriously the dynamics of power? How do we set about developing a responsive curriculum? Two big questions is, who do we involve in answering this question? Because we assume it's just the lecturers or whatever, but there's a challenge beyond that in this question. And how should we set about developing a responsive curriculum? What kind of power relations do we need to take into account? What would we expect to see in that curriculum? This is about, once again, looking at ourselves as teachers, looking at our environments, looking at our modes of delivery in our curricula, how we mediate learning, and what we should be teaching, the content, but also what materials should we be using.